We're 3 months into 2019, and it seems like everybody's talking about charter schools, from Gavin Newsom to local school boards. Teachers held strike in 2 major cities, leading to moratoriums on charter schools.
Proposed moratoriums.
Proposed moratoriums, thank you. And locally, Ravenswood City School District in East Palo Alto is grappling with how to house a growing charter. So Elena, your cover story this week covers the minefield that is the charter school movement. Why don't you give us an overview of what's happening now and why there's a lot of controversy?
Mm-hmm. In East Palo Alto, there's been a lot of tension in the last few weeks over KIP, which is one of the 2 charters under the Ravenswood City School District. They are growing as they have planned to grow since they started a few years ago and need more space. And so they asked originally for a single campus that would be their long-term home, which stirred up some concern that a district school might have to close to make room for them. And that proposal has been walked back, and they're figuring out how to accommodate KIP, but it's really brought up all these questions about the future of Ravenswood in the context of KIP and other charter schools and other sort of alternative options within East Palo Alto and the surrounding community, and what that means for a district with declining enrollment, budget issues, and it's just always, been struggling to turn itself around and serve its students better.
Yeah, and what's happening in East Palo Alto totally mirrors what's happening across the state. I mean, Oakland and Los Angeles were the 2 cities where the teachers went on strike.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of charters in California, are there not?
Yes. There's now 1 in 10 of K through 12 students are now charter school students, so 10% of the state's total K through 12 enrollment. This comes from charters. And it's just been this huge boom across the nation, but particularly so in California, and sort of without a lot of close oversight or regulation around it. And so a lot of the sort of friction now is coming from critics of charters and defenders of public schools pushing back and saying this has sort of gotten to a point where we really need to step back and put in some sort of accountability around this so the neighborhood public schools don't suffer.
I had a question about the fact that you're mentioning that there are so many of these charter schools. When we see on television the striking teachers, they're usually in districts such as Oakland or Los Angeles, where there are some underserved populations, not the wealthiest school districts. And I wondered if you see the same thing sort of across the board. Is there pushback in wealthier communities as well, such as school districts like Palo Alto's?
Mm-hmm. There are fewer charter schools in wealthy school districts. There are none in Palo Alto, so they think because charters, part of their mission is to sort of better serve the underserved students, the low-income, minority, first-generation students whose parents, for whatever reason, are not satisfied with the kind of education that their children are receiving within the public school system. And so, the charters, some of them come in on open schools, but a lot of times it's local parents organizing for a different kind of option for their kids. So there are parents in each of those communities, the same in East Palo Alto, who just decided that we really want something more, and they, gather these petitions and open up a charter.
How are they fundamentally different?
So charters are considered public schools, but they're run by most often nonprofits, and they receive state funding, but they are free from most of the typical regulations that school districts are, traditional school districts. So they have more autonomy, teachers have more freedom to experiment, and that was sort of the ideal of the charter school movement, that it was going to be this sort of innovative, fringe experimental thing that would then help public schools sort of learn how to educate in different ways.
Teachers aren't generally unionized.
They are not.
Who work for charters, but the schools do have to have their students take the state tests.
Yes.
Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there is some measure of accountability, or at least benchmarking.
There is, and Gavin Newsom just very quickly signed into legislation a new law that will require charter schools to operate under the same sort of public transparency requirements as school districts, so holding open board meetings, providing public records under the Public Records Act requires those kinds of things that didn't exist before.
Are there standardized curricula that they have to follow? Do they have to follow state curricula and state testing, for example?
I don't think they're required to. I think they generally, like a KIP, they follow Common Core state standards and things like that, but I don't think they have any requirements in that way.
So you asked what differentiates them, and my understanding is that nothing has to differentiate them in some ways. I mean, they don't have to be any different than the neighborhood schools, and that's one of the concerns that opponents of the proliferation of charters kind of mention. So what exactly does KIPP do, and what does Aspire, which runs 2 schools, what are they about?
They really emphasize college prep. I mean, I think if you look at any of their materials or talk to anyone from their schools, it's really, even from the youngest grades, they're really looking towards getting these kids into college or career. So focusing on that, and then all the other, sort of terms that you would hear school districts use, I think they're just applied in different ways, sort of personalized learning, very high expectations, academic rigor. But I think within the structure of a charter school where they have more autonomy, they can have a longer school day, so they can provide students with more attention, the teachers have more freedom, and they might have closer connections with students because it's a smaller environment. So they use the same, I think, words and kind of goals and aspirations that any school would, but it's just applied within a different environment.
Yeah. So it seems to me that the controversy is really because of the impact on districts. We can talk about whether or not charters are achieving anything better for their students academically, and it seems like there's mixed results on that, and in certain districts they're achieving and some they're not.
Yeah.
But what's happening in districts is it seems like there's a lot of flaws being exposed, a lot of difficulties that the districts are having financially, academically, and I've got to think that it's tied in some ways to the population that they're trying to serve and the needs of the population. These are not students with families who can supplement with tutors and whatnot, and some of them come to school hungry. A lot are on the free and reduced lunch programs as well.
And this is a systemic issue of funding, right?
Yeah.
This is across the board. I think some people on the school board have also mentioned that as well for Ravenswood School District, right? And so one of the other things I wondered about is if both the charters and the district schools are competing for the same dollars, then how is either one really able to, how are they succeeding, there's not an upping, is there any kind of redundancy that's going on there too?
Well, for districts like Ravenswood, they receive funding based on enrollment. So when a student leaves, so does the public dollars, they go with them. So in a sense, they are competing. And so the schools with more enrollment that are structured like that have more money to serve their students, but they also then have higher costs because they have more students. And I think there is this, the critics of the public schools say sort of that this is a reality that they need to adjust to. And if school boards are being sort of irresponsible in how they're handling their budgets and they're not decreasing, staffing and the adjustable costs along with their declining enrollment, then that's on them. And that's their responsibility as sort of the fiscal stewards of a school district. And for school districts, I feel like they're sort of fighting tooth and nail, and they need the revenue to improve. And so they're stuck in this sort of cycle of wanting to attract more kids and families, but losing them every single year.
And aren't they sharing like some of the buildings and that type of thing as well?
They are. They share facilities, which is under Prop 39, which is relatively recent. It was approved in 2000. School districts have to provide equitable facilities because even though the charter school students are at charters, they're still public school students, so they have to have the same kind of learning environments.
And who's responsible for, let's say, janitorial services, all the ancillary sort of services that keep the school running?
The school district.
The school district. So they're kind of doing that for two then, right?
They're receiving a fee though.
They get some fees.
Okay.
They get an oversight fee and facility fees, so they do get some money to help with that.
Some would say maybe that's not enough, and maybe that should be upped as well. Yeah, it seems like though, to address your point about they're sharing the pie, I know that people are concerned that the pie is shrinking for the traditional school district, the traditional schools, but are there critics of charter school growth who would say, oh, we can just make proponents of charter school growth who are saying that districts should just become more nimble. They should have, smaller classrooms, they should have more personalized learning. Isn't it better to not have one kid be one among 3,000 or 4,000 students, but one in 2,000. Are there ideas that are coming up from different school board members or school districts to kind of rejigger what's happening at the district level?
And there's sort of different examples I heard about sort of reporting for the story across the country. There was an interesting network of schools in Indianapolis where there were state laws passed that allowed school districts to create sort of this hybrid between a traditional and a charter school where it was operated under the district, but run by nonprofit boards, so they had some more freedom, but they were still within the district. And so then the district didn't feel like they were losing funding and students. Stephanie Fitch, who's the vice president of the Ravenswood School Board, suggested that it's great to have alternative programs, and we can't sort of operate as a one-size-fits-all because that doesn't work for kids. And she talked about her own experience going to middle college and needing an alternative program. And so the idea that charters could help districts run alternative programs but still be sort of within the district rather than siphoning students off into a separate school.
Yeah. It seems like the authority of the boards is one question that's been raised. What do they actually have the right to examine before they approve a charter? Like, do they have a right to examine what the fiscal impact is going to be
No.
on the district? Okay.
They're pretty limited in terms of the way the laws are written. It's pretty much, if a charter does its homework and submits a comprehensive petition that's realistic and they're going to get it done, they can't analyze the financial impact, the academic impact on the district. So even though in Ravenswood they have voted down charter petitions, there is a pretty just small set of reasons why you can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any proposals at the state level to change the authority that school districts have?
Yes, there's a whole package of legislation. One of them would be to allow school boards to consider the financial impact when they're considering charter petitions. Some of the other proposed bills would propose a statewide cap on charters, which existed in the original law, but then was later amended. And then another law or proposed bill would also eliminate the ability of charters to appeal denials. So currently, they can, if a local board denies their petition, they can bring it up to the county and then the state level.
Yeah.
What about administrations? Is there a redundancy there in terms of, you have the charter school administration and you've got the public school administration, and how does that affect the quality of schooling that the kids are getting?
I think there's, charter schools are structured really differently, and they don't have to have the same kind of traditional, what you would think of as a district office. And certainly they do. They have a principal and counselors and all that kind of stuff. But I think a criticism is for some school districts is that they are top heavy, and so they need to be more nimble at the administrative level. But they're not structured differently.
We haven't mentioned yet that the district superintendent was just forced to resign. So Gloria Hernandez-Goff is exiting the district on March 31st. There's an interim right now. Is that going to affect at all this decision that needs to be made about KIP and where it's going to be located? Because that's still pending.
I don't think so. There's already been some discussion about it while the superintendent, Gloria Hernandez-Goff, was on paid administrative leave, including this agreement, which seemed like sort of a shift in approach to pursue what KIP had suggested, which was making room at their current site. So they're moving forward. They have to the district has to provide a final facilities offer by April 1st, and I think they're set to present it at next week's board meeting. So they have to just keep plowing ahead with this.
Yeah, and at one point the board was thinking about, just in discussion, and one board member was questioning whether or not they could sue or they could take it to court or push back.
Yeah, it's really been
somehow.
up and down and
Very
things seem a little bit
challenging.
more civil, and that they've agreed to sort of look at this, which is a one-year short-term solution because KIP is going to grow again next year, but then at least they can buy the time to be more proactive about figuring out what to do next year.
Has anyone figured out if there's sort of a breaking point for the traditional public school? If you keep having this flight out of there into these charter schools, is there a point at which they just throw up their hands and say, well, we're just going to have charter schools?
Yeah, I feel like that's sort of the question at the heart of this. I don't think that any school district wants to do that, and a lot of them are pushing back. But it is really also hard to measure the actual financial impact on districts because there have been studies, and I spoke to some researchers, but that even is sort of debated, and there's questions about whether these researchers that say that there is a cost, whether or not they're biased, and vice versa. So it's hard to know, and I think I even talked about that with the board members, and they say, we believe that it's negatively affecting our budget. And of course, the dollars are leaving, but we have no way to quantify it or what it will look like in 5 or 10 years besides doing enrollment projections, which involve a lot of other factors.
So the state is taking a look at the fiscal impact right now?
So that'll be interesting. Yeah, Gavin Newsom asked the state superintendent to convene a committee to sort of analyze the fiscal impact.
Okay, well, hopefully some nonpartisan
Right.
kind of result will come out of that. And then also another change coming up is that I believe July 1st in California, new charter management companies need to be nonprofit. They can't be.
Yes, I haven't researched too much about that law yet. They did away
Yeah.
with for-profit charters, which I think everyone is pretty happy about.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, there's a lot going on in this. So, is there anything surprising to you in your research? I know we talked a little bit about the politics and how heated that was. Was there anything that came up for you?
I mean, it is really intense. I think people on both sides will always say, you know, we're doing what's best for the kids, and then that sort of manifests in different ways depending on who's talking. But I was encouraged by, and I don't know how much of this is just people wanting to present a certain image, but people on both sides locally, you know, from KIPP and the school board saying this shouldn't be an us versus them fight. And we need to think about better ways to not just sort of bicker at each other and actually serve these kids well. And, you know, the district taking a look at what it can do to be a better school district, and KIPP doing what it can to sort of support that too. So
Yeah. Okay. Good note to end on. Thanks, Elena. That wraps up this edition of Behind the Headlines. To stay up to date on all local news, you can subscribe to Express, which is our daily free e-newsletter that comes to your mailbox. You can find that at paloaltoonline.com/express. And we'll see you next week.